So I realized basically I can make videos about whatever I want if I don't care if anybody watches them, because this is mostly for me to record what I'm doing. So I wanted to talk about what I have been reading lately, or what I am going to read. Um, Firstly, I watched somebody else's YouTube video where they talked about Sense and Sensibility, and I want to make another video where I record my thoughts about Jane Austen's all of Jane Austen's books, because I've recently done a reread of, just this past year, I reread Persuasion, and I reread Pride and Prejudice, and I also read Lady Susan. And I've been putting off reading Sandition just because, it's not done, and it's like sad somehow that it'll be over. I have read all of Jane Austen's novels, I think at least twice, all of them now, some of them more than once. Anyway, I can talk about that more later. But anyway, this YouTube video, I will link it. She really loved Sense and Sensibility, and I was like, man, I really didn't like Sense and Sensibility very much. It was one of my least favorite Austen novels. So that's why I haven't included it in my most recent reread. But you know what? I was like, I will go and check it out. And I found this copy in the library, which actually has some interesting commentary in the beginning. So I was just enjoying reading that. And I just started reading it, and I'm like, oh, you know what? Austen is so good. It's so good. The writing is so good. The characters are so good. I will talk more about that later, but I think also from the same person's channel, I was encouraged to go find the brothers Karamazov. So the thing is this one has been on my list before, and I've always put it off because, it's like this giant brick of a book. And I'm still stuck in this thought of well, I'm not really a classics reader. The thing is every single time I have stuck my neck out there and read the classics, even though I was afraid it might be boring, I had an absolutely fabulous time. I'm sorry, but so many of these classics are classics for a reason. And I've started this, and wow, I'm super enjoying it already. And you know what? It makes me think of a little bit of why I enjoy Austen. I just get so much enjoyment of reading about what people were doing and thinking hundreds of years ago and relating to it. When he's talking about, just in the first pages, when Dostoevsky is talking about, the main character, the dad who dies or whatever. And it's like, wow, just the way that people are described. And it's like, yes, I know people like that who exist today. I know exactly what he's talking about. And I just love that. So yeah, I think I'm really going to enjoy this. And so I'm actually glad that it's long. I'm not really sure how to pick a good translation, because I went looking for the brothers Karamazov. I went looking for the brothers Karamazov, and a lot of the copies were checked out, which always makes me wonder, is there a course starting in the fall where they have to read this? Can I take that literature course? When, all the copies are checked out. Also, they're renovating the Staatsbibliothek right now, and it's really pissing me off because they have completely destroyed the library website as well. It's barely functional, and the search doesn't work, and I can't go to my favorite library, and I can't even request books from my favorite library. So that's a whole other story. But anyways, I was looking for the brothers Karamazov, which there were several copies, several of which were not available. And the copy that was available had a cover that I absolutely hated. But I was like, don't be a baby, go look for it anyways. So I went looking for it anyways, and right next to it in the same section was the Karamazov brothers. Anyway, so I was wondering, how did they make that decision to have it the Karamazov brothers versus the brothers Karamazov? And do people have opinions about what is a better translation and that sort of thing. I mean, I'm going to read this translation because this is my only option. I do notice that I am quite enjoying this translation. I read a lot of books, both fiction and nonfiction, in English, obviously. And I also read a lot in Swedish. And I will say that I have read a lot of really bad translations. Like there's The Circle. Is it a trilogy or is it a quartet? I don't remember. I think it's a trilogy. So there's the Circle trilogy, which is YA, right? And I read that in Swedish, like when I was starting to learn Swedish, and really liked it. And then so I got the English translation for my cousins, and I was looking through the English translation, and I was like, this is bad. I don't like it. I don't think it was well done. And oftentimes, I think to myself, like if there's a book that has come out fairly recently, sometimes the Swedish translation will be easier to get a hold of than the English translation because people usually want to read it in the original language if they can, which fair enough. But there have been some times where I'm like, oh, well, I'll just take the Swedish translation then. And then it's just like cringy garbage. And I'm like, this is a bad translation. I can't exactly put my finger on what makes it bad, but reading works that have been translated from one language that I'm fluent in to another language that I'm fluent in, I'm like, I absolutely hate that. It's just like nails on a chalkboard. I will say a little caveat here. I have read the Swedish translations, or at least a Swedish translation of the Twilight books, and I thought whoever did those, or at least whoever did Twilight, like the first one, did a good job. So there's that. But I'm really enjoying this one, even though it is, it's translated from Russian, which like I can speak and understand like a tiny bit of Russian, obviously not remotely enough to make it through a classic novel. But yeah, where was I going with that? Yeah, normally I kind of don't really like translations, but obviously I am forced to read a translation here. And I'm sorry, but the other thing is I think sometimes the Swedish translations are not always the best. Like an English translation, you'll have lots of different options of different translators, and it's just a much bigger, more competitive field. Because I feel like sometimes translating from English to Swedish or from Swedish to English, there's just not that many people doing it, and not everybody is very good at it. So those were both from the library. Those were my classic reads. I am the type of person who likes to read like a whole bunch of books at the same time. And, I have actually always been that way. Like as a kid, I loved going to the library and getting a huge stack of books and then just reading a little bit of this one, and a little bit of that one, a little bit of that one. And it's funny because my parents always love to talk about how my dad's mom would do the same thing. Like she would always have a stack of like 8 to 10 books. And he would always be like, Mom, how can you be reading all of those at the same time? And she would. I don't know. So maybe it's an inherited thing. So I almost never buy books because I don't like how much space they take up physically. And also, when I have access to the library system that I have access to now, like there's no reason to buy them. Like I have access to an amazing library system. I have friends who are literally librarians who can get a hold of things. And you know what? I use people I know. I have friends who will buy new books and then they read them and then they lend them to me. And my mom also lends me books, and she also lets me have like some of her ebooks and stuff like that. So I never buy books, and I almost never buy ebooks either. So that's also nice to not spend money. But also I love that like things like this, Sense and Sensibility and like the classics, there are, I don't know, I have access to like 10 different editions if I wanted to go through the university library system as well as the city library system. So that is really fun for me. That's just a side note. The main thing is I bought this book this past summer because I have been thinking that the first 4 of these books, which are about like the Chronicles of Yang Chen and oh my god, Kyoshi, I absolutely adored those books. So the first four were written by FCE, and I have reread them multiple times. And I was thinking, you know what? I want, because they're in the library. So there are some books that I have checked out from the library. Like, I don't even know how many times I've checked them out from the library. And it's funny because it's usually like the same copy, because there's, the sci-fi fantasy section in the big main city library, the one that's closed that I'm pissed about. So I'm like, yeah, here's the same, even the same physical book that I've checked out many times. Anyway, um, I just don't like this one. I just, it's like the first four were like these twisty political thrillers that were really, I mean, they were written for such a narrow, specific group of people who have watched this TV show as a child, watched it again a bunch of times as an adult, analyzed it, and want to go deeper into what made that show so good. And it was so good because it wasn't, it wasn't like dark and edgy or anything. It was just a natural extrapolation of this world and the history of the world and that sort of thing. And this one, it's like we're going back to, because it's a different author, we're going back to like the surface level, and it's a little preachy, and it's a little bit like, I'm like, what happened to show don't tell? There's no, like, the complexity is not there. And that's really sad, because obviously part of Roku's story is that, he's friends with Sozin, the emperor, who I would argue becomes evil. Like, he and Sozin are really good friends. And I think that story is more impactful if Sozin, is a normal person who gets drawn into this, or he becomes evil. Because, okay, I'm not explaining this well, but I feel like in this book they're trying to show that Sozin was actually super evil all along from the start, and I just think it's more interesting to have more nuance to it, if you know what I mean. Like the shades of gray. People aren't 100% bad or 100% good. Like, it's less, it's a less interesting story, this story of, friendship between two people when their interests diverge, and how do they handle that, is much more interesting than, well, actually this one guy was super evil from day one and this guy just didn't notice it. Like, I'm like, how did he not notice it over the next 50 years? Also, it's just not well written. And I think FCE, the guy who wrote the first four, said something like he felt like the pressure was too much and he didn't know where to go from there and all that sort of thing. And I was like, couldn't you have at least tried? Even if it wasn't very good, I would still read it. It's just like, I feel like the story has become so shallow and surface level. Like, it's completely lacking the depth. Like, you really feel like you could be reading historical fiction when you're reading FCE's books. So that was pretty disappointing. And as a result, it's taking me forever to finish this book. Like, I've been reading this, I bought this, I don't know, in the middle of summer, like in August. And yeah, I should have been able to finish this in like a day or so. Speaking of books that I finished in like a day or so, I mean, look at this one. This I finished in, I don't know, 2 days. This has taken me months and months. And that's not to say that this book is amazing, because it's not. I understand all the complaints about it, and I would say they're valid. So, well, yeah, now I'm going to do some spoilers for this one. So the thing is like, yes, I agree. I totally knew where this was going basically from the start. I had a mild hope that we would do something more interesting. you know, like when they're talking about but it's so engrossing. Like the first, I don't know, the first half of the book is so deeply, you know, it just sucks you in like you're watching a thriller sci-fi TV show. Um, when they're explaining this world and exploring this world, and it feels very real, and you're kind of trying to get an idea of like, okay, what is actually going on? So here's the spoiler. Like I said, I knew from very early on, as somebody who has watched so many sci-fi TV shows and movies and read so many sci-fi books. Yeah, I was known pretty early on that, yeah, they're in like some sort of simulation, right? At least. Oh, they're in long-term sleep, they're on a colony ship. Like, yes, I I understand. Um, but I still, you know, like I said, I had the slightest hope when he was going over to the nursery and that sort of thing. I was like, maybe it'll be something different this time. You know, like what if they were really still on Earth? I've always thought it would be funny or interesting, like if we had one of these dystopian worlds, and something else was happening in the rest of the world. Like, I think it would be kind of funny if they're like trapped in this bubble where the, you know, they sail any further out because of this electromagnetic field or the storms that come or whatever. If they finally manage to escape and the rest of the world is just like, oh yeah, you know, things are pretty normal now, like we've solved a lot of those problems and it's just you crazy people on this island. Or I don't know, something else, like something other than, oh, it's all a simulation. I was just kind of like, I mean, that was a little lame, but I was still super entertained throughout this whole book. Like I said, I read it so quick because the first half was super engrossing, creating this new world, and then the rest of it, it was like, yeah, I kind of knew where it was going, but it was entertaining anyway. I did like that it did not have like a super depressing ending or anything. You know, it has kind of a hopeful ending, and you know, they're kind of successful in what they set out to do. And it kind of all works out and that sort of stuff. So that was interesting. That was slightly different. Oh, yeah. But going back to the what if it had been something other than a simulation? Like I said, because there are stories, okay, so there's these sci-fi stories about this quote unquote perfect society. It seems like a utopia, but it's actually a dystopia. This is a very common trope. And it's like sometimes, well, most times it's a simulation of some kind, either A, or B, it is like they escape from the simulation. Okay, major spoilers here for Wayward Pines. You know, Blake Crouch's Wayward Pines, which is also, no, does it have any great literary value? No, absolutely not. Was it super entertaining to me? Yes, it totally was. I read those books and like it was like they were dumb action movie popcorn flicks. I had so much fun. Um but you know, like the world is actually destroyed outside of this their little bubble. And I'm like, just for once, I would like it, or I think it would be interesting if the world wasn't destroyed outside of their little bubble. You know what I mean? Like, I think it would be funny or interesting if they had to like come back and interact with normal life. Um, so kind of like, or what I always found interesting about The Handmaid's Tale is that we actually get a tiny bit of that because at some point in The Handmaid's Tale, I'm pretty sure there are like Japanese tourists or something who are observing, you know, what has happened to the United States and like, you know, rubbernecking and taking pictures and stuff, being tourists basically. And so I'm like, that's interesting. And I would like to see Gilead or whatever. Actually, I would be more interested to see Gilead from the perspective of the rest of the world. Like, what is the dialogue going on in the rest of the world? What are they saying about Gilead? What are they trying to do politically about Gilead. You know, that's what I'm curious about, not the very depressing everyday minutia of living in a dystopia, I guess. Um, and I'm trying to think, I think, you know, I have seen some comments or posts on Tumblr, I'm sure, back in the day with the Hunger Games, where people are like, what if it's just the US that's so crazy and fucked up like this? What if the rest of the world is like, what are they doing? They have the Hunger Games and they're so crazy and this sort of thing. And I'm like, to me, that would be very interesting. As somebody who really loves to read political thrillers, and that sort of thing, that would be fascinating to me. Imagining like there is this dystopian society or whatever, but we are looking at it from the perspective of the rest of the world, which is, more normal and not dystopian. And what is the rest of the world thinking and doing? Like, what's the discourse about it? What are they trying to do politically about it? I just think that would be super interesting. And that's not a book that I have found. So, yeah, let me know if you can think of something. Another one that I have been hearing about but haven't gotten around to reading, and so far, I've only read like the first chapter or so. I don't know, some pages. But, this is really nice. This is like exactly what it says on the tin. It's supposed to be a space opera. It's a space opera. I have to say that it's already a little interesting to me, or like a little more interesting to me, that normally from the outset in this type of book, it's like, and the Empire was super evil and everyone hated them. And in this book, the main character is, kind of fascinated by the art and culture that comes out of the Empire. She's fascinated by the concept of the city, and she's fascinated by the language. And so she has learned to speak the language and she's studied it. And, there's kind of this vibe of like moving to the big city, and having to navigate all these new things. And that the Empire, it is the Empire, and obviously they don't like love the Empire, and they're kind of trying to stay independent and this sort of thing, but it's not like, and the Empire is evil because they're super evil, because empires are always super evil. It just gets a little old sometimes, and I say this as like, maybe I'm projecting when I read fantasy, and the fantasy is like, well, monarchy is bad actually, and I'm like, yeah, we know that, but it's interesting to read about. I want something that's interesting to read about, instead of the same old dystopian fight for freedom. Like, obviously that can be done well, but it's not what I want to read about all the time. So it's really interesting to me that this is like a slightly more neutral, so far, look at, how this society functions, a foreign society to this girl. And that she is fairly competent. It's not like, I'm a teenager and I'm randomly thrust into this blah blah. No, she's competent at her job. She was the best person for the job, and she has this, memory of the previous ambassadors and stuff. You know what? It makes me think of something that could be in one of the better Star Trek plots, actually. So I have high hopes for this being fun, but not necessarily amazing. Then the last one, I got this one. Let's see. I don't know. It was maybe in the horror section. So it's about like this wasteland that they're, hunting criminals in and whatever. So I haven't read much of this one, and actually I've never heard anything about this one. So I don't know if I'm going to finish this, or if I'm going to have time to really get into it. And it might turn out to be terrible. I don't know. like, I don't have a great stomach for gore and like edgy misogyny just for the sake of it, you know? Like, I'm sorry, I've never read Game of Thrones. I just can't get on board with all that. You know, that sort of thing. So, we'll see. If this is like creepy enough rather than gross, if this is more on the creepy side rather than the gross side, then I will read it. If it gets too gross, which it might because it's written by a dude, I don't know anything about it, then I'll drop it. But yeah, just kind of a fall read, basically. And I also have this one, which I bought. So I found an like it's a little bookstore. It's seriously a tiny little bookstore that is only for sci-fi literature. And I was so excited to find it. And they have a whole shelf of Star Trek books. So I keep seeing these, you know, like in thrift stores and that sort of thing. I think I paid like $3 for this. And I just read the back, and it sounded the most interesting to me. Like, I would pick this episode to watch of Star Trek The Next Generation. But I'm kind of like, I'm not sure how, because I'm a huge Trekkie. I love Star Trek. I love Next Gen. I love Voyager. I love Deep Space Nine, you know. I will even watch the original series, although it's not like my 100% favorite. And some of the newer Trek, sure. But I'm not sure that it is going to work in book form. And also, I don't know, people who have read more Star Trek novels may tell me that this one is garbage. I mean, like, they have written so many Star Trek books. So I will give this a try, and then I might do some more research about what Star Trek books are better, you know? So here we have the stack. Something I bought, I don't think I'll get around to. I like in the next, this is, yeah, for the next month or so, maybe? I don't know. Another book that I will test and see if I get into it. If not, I'll just return it. Sci-fi, which I've started reading, quite enjoy. Sci-fi, which I read through in like a day or so, which is good because I'm sure somebody else has already requested this. A book which I bought, which I'm going to have to force myself to finish. And I'm going to force myself to finish it so that I can probably get rid of it. Because I want to buy the first ones of these so I can have them to reread. And then some classics, which I have started reading already, and I enjoy them so much. I need to read more classics, clearly, because I'm having such a good time. And both of these, like, I can check books out from the library and then renew them like 2 or 3 times. So if nobody else requests them, I can have them for like months and months and months. So yeah, and then if I don't finish them in that amount of time, I'll just return them and, you know, check them out again, remember my page and that sort of thing.